In this video, I'm just going to be talking about what my experience was like in the past week. I've spent over 100 hours working on a e-commerce AI agent using OpenClaw. Now, this has taught me a lot about kind of how OpenClaw works, and honestly, I'm just sharing what has worked for me. And that's it, you know, what I mean, it's just my own experience. I'm just gonna get right into it, especially too if you're trying to figure out like the best tips, hacks, things like that. And I'm honestly just sharing my own experience. So it's, I'm not like some crazy magician or anything like that. I'm just kind of vibe coding everything and at the same time just learning. So I was basically running all this thing on a virtual private server, and I'm burning a ton of tokens. I've probably burnt over 100 million tokens. And if you haven't used OpenClaw yet, or if you are using OpenClaw with some of the most frontier foundational models, then you are going to be burning a lot of money, especially if you're on a budget. You probably don't want to do that. Now, the only trade off is the intelligence aspect and the reasoning. I mean, unfortunately, I think Claude Code has prevented people using their subscription tokens to access to access OpenClaw and use it with it. And now you're pretty much left with using the API or some other type of service. And I think OpenAI allows that. I'm not sure exactly, but I've been just using open or just I should say API providers or something like OpenRouter to just route and test out different models. So if you're trying to figure out like a easy way how to set this thing up, honestly, the fastest thing I want to set up it on was on DigitalOcean. So you can pretty much set up a virtual private server up on this thing. They made it super easy. I never did this before, but it was so simple because I just had literally Claude on a separate browser, and I was just prompting it, hey, how can I set this up? Whatever. If you don't know what the heck you're doing, just have Opus or like Sonnet 4.7 right by the side, and or what is it, 4.7, 4.6, whatever, who cares? But just have one of the models right next to you, and just if you don't know what you're doing, just literally let it walk you through it. You know what I mean? It's as simple as that. I never had a virtual private server set up before, but I set it up and I learned a lot of things from community people, asking people around, and also too just kind of doing and messing around with things myself. The only way you're really going to learn how to use this thing is if you actually do anything yourself. You know what I mean? No matter how many videos you watch, what people talk about, the best way you're going to learn any of this stuff is literally if you just get in the mud and you start doing and breaking things. You know what I mean? So they had the simple setup here. You can just set it up with OpenClaw. Once you set it up, this is, by the way, not a like a beginner video for OpenClaw where you're pretty much just trying to get it set up. This is the wrong video for you if that's what you're thinking this is. This is just more so you've been experimenting with it and maybe you're trying to figure out some other hacks, right? Or like how are other people doing it if you want to maybe optimize your workflow. So, whether it's you're thinking of getting a Mac Mini or a VPS or running it on your local machine, I just chose VPS because I'm honestly not trying to put that risk out there of just getting a Mac Mini for no reason, but now I'm actually maybe considering it at some point in the near future because it's actually worth it. You know what I mean? But right now I got a plan on DigitalOcean that's costing me roughly 24 bucks. I think the the RAM that I got is like attached to my account has roughly 4 to 8 gigs. I forget, and then I think it has roughly like 48 gigabytes of storage or something like that. I mean, it's more than enough. It's nothing I have to like ever really worry about in the near term because it's all mostly just storing files and stuff like that. But I set this thing up on DigitalOcean. I was using at some point Discord and I put it into a Discord server, but I don't really feel comfortable with that because if someone gets into my Discord or they just start prompting it without me knowing it, it can literally access your shit. You know what I mean? I don't want that happening and it's just kind of a risk to me. So I started using Telegram. I think it's better that way in my opinion. In terms of security, one thing I think that helps is you can set up a password on your gateway. Now, the thing is, I'm not no security expert. I'm just kind of like sharing you what I've been doing using passwords for your gateway. I think you can also change like what server is being hosted on. And if anything, honestly, just self prompt the bot and let it figure out other areas how it can improve its own security. So I'm not really going to touch too much on that because I'm not like no security expert, but I just been kind of like looking around online what other people are doing and just kind of following best practices, not to be an idiot and revealing information that can leave you exposed or just leave you in a serious vulnerability because these things, depending on how much access you give it to, if you give this thing access to your whole entire machine, I see some people giving it access to their whole entire machine. If you use a terrible model, it can literally wipe away everything. There's been times where I did some work, or like in the beginning when I was trying to set it up, it did things and everything just got wiped clean, what I mean, really bad on the virtual private server. And it came to a point where I almost just stopped using this thing, but I saw the power and potential in it. And I just kept on kind of pushing and just trying to see how I can get better with it. You know what I mean? So don't give it access to things you don't feel comfortable with. If this is going to be exposed to other people, then just be very careful about what you're letting it have access to. So whether your emails, whether it has its own account, some people are creating their own accounts for it. There's been accounts I've created for it where I feel pretty comfortable giving it access to. And when you're giving access to tools, just be wary about like how much access it actually has. Can it, like, does it have access to spending? Does it have access to creating ads? Does it have access to potentially wipe out all your information? So just be very careful and not set up skills or anything like that, which can just literally like dig up your graveyard. You know what I mean? So that's why I haven't really installed it on my own personal machine. I'd rather have it just on a separate private server, just doing its own thing. And that's really it. Now, file access, I'm going to get to file access in just a bit, actually. So initially, I was like, how the hell can I actually look at what the hell this thing's doing with its own files? So I was using this thing called FileZilla, so you can kind of see right here what it looks like. It looked very wonky, very corny, and if you've watched some of my earlier videos, I'm just kind of like learning all this real time, you know what I mean? So it kind of looked like this, and then what you would basically do is you would basically click on markdown files here, and then it would pretty much open everything, and then you can kind of see it in like a text editor app on your computer. So if you're on a Mac, it would probably open up in either TextEdit or probably in Xcode, and you would be able to see the markdown file. Personally, after just a lot of frustrations and dealing with this crappy software, I mean, don't get me wrong, it solves the problem. It did serve its purpose. I think the best way how you can view, modify, and edit these files is literally on Obsidian. You don't need to get a Obsidian sync plan. You don't need to get a Mac Mini to be able to see the GUI and edit the files. You can literally just set up a secure shell file system where you basically access the files on the virtual private server. And then once the file, so this video is not going to be showing you how to do all that. I'm just telling you like what I'm doing, and then you can just kind of do your own diligence and find online how to do all this crap. But once you have access to the files, the storage on the virtual private server, you can just pretty much hook up a separate Obsidian vault, and then you can pretty much have everything connected here. So if you're wondering like how these backlinks works, we're going to get to that in just a moment, but I think this is probably the easiest ways how to like navigate through your your memory, like the whole entire directory of CloudBot. I think that's what they call it here, right? CloudBot. And what you can do is you can easily just edit the things. So when you make an edit, it's automatically going to be edited on the VPS. When anything happens on the VPS by CloudBot or OpenClaw, it's also going to reflect back here. You're just going to have to like have a command set up on Obsidian to refresh the whole entire thing when you know there's an edit been made, and then you can pretty much see the live changes in real time. So I think that's been a pretty game changer for me, in my opinion. Now, in the beginning, I didn't really know what to do with like these primary files here, so such as like the soul, identity, and what I should make this bot really be like. And I think the biggest breakthrough for me is when I started I started prompting the soul more. I started configuring it more to my liking and personality. And one big takeaway from this is to give the bot some sort of personality, but what you also want the bot to do is have some sort of evolution with you. So when this thing is like learning from you, it's learning from your thinking patterns, it's learning from all the mistakes you're running through. It's either logging it in the core memory if it's something that needs to be injected every single new session start, you have a conversation with it, or it's properly logging things into the daily memory files. Because if it's not and you have no logs, then there's gonna be literally nothing to learn from. So you want to give it like very growth-minded prompts where it learns with you. If it's can anticipate needs or things with you, you want to give it sort of like flows where it's like, hey, before you just say, I can't do this, why don't you search up on the web first? Why don't you first see if there's any sort of file within your database where you can find a solution? Are there any keys you can reference? You know, what I mean, can you refresh the token yourself if you have to like have a new token to do something? You know what I mean? So you want to have like these different protocols set up. So you're just because this thing is literally intelligence, you know what I mean? So if you give it the right tools, if you've created skills for it, if you gave it access to the web, let it do all these things where it's literally acting like an employee or a sort of thinking companion or like even a partner where it can do its own due diligence. It can think, it can self-modify itself. And the only way it's going to know how to do that is if you literally prompt it to have this sort of mindset, you know what I mean? And if you're using a way better model, I've noticed that when I use way better models, it can anticipate my needs way better. But the thing is, this thing burns a crap ton of tokens every single day. So I'm not trying to spend that much money on a crap ton of token usage at this phase I'm in right now. You know what I mean? Maybe at some other point, but at the current state, this thing burns a crap ton of tokens. So if you're using a more weaker model, and I'll get to the models in just a second, I've been using Kimi 2.5. If you're using weaker models, you're probably going to need a lot more rigid rules, guidelines, and things because it's not going to be able to anticipate these things, especially to the longer the chat sessions occur, how many compactions you've had in a chat and things of that nature. What's going to happen is it's just going to get kind of dumber over time. So you want to have like just healthy hygiene when you're using this thing. New sessions, you want to have things documented very clearly. And the thing is, you don't have to be doing all this stuff yourself. You can basically get it to self-prompt itself to modify all these files. And if you don't know where to start, just open up, say, like a model maybe you're paying for that is at the edge. So say like if you have a Claude subscription, get Opus to research the best practices right now. Or what you can do is you can just find videos online, copy all the transcripts of everything the person talks about for the best practice for OpenClaw, and then just feed it into the model. So you're using Gemini 3 Pro, or if you're using something like Opus, or maybe something from OpenAI, or whatever the hell you're using, feed it all the transcripts, and then just basically tell the bot to self-prompt itself to modify all these files, or just get all the files from whatever model you're using and then just inject it into these core files. So just let these things grow with you. That's kind of the main thing here. And sometimes be careful, you know what I mean? Because sometimes it'll do something stupid if you're using like a cheap model and it'll wipe out stuff. So make very clear rules when, say, you're self-modifying yourself and there's something very important. Do I only append to this list, or can I delete things at my own will? You know what I mean? Or are there certain files where I'm not allowed to touch no matter what? So you want to have like these sorts of rules so this thing can follow and not just be a complete idiot. Because sometimes I've just done things where it literally wiped my slate clean. You know what I mean? So hard lesson in that. So like I said, I've been using primarily Kimi K25. I think it's the best for if you're like on a budget. I think the cost is like 50 cents input and then somewhere around $2 to $3 for output. So it's not bad. Assuming if you have like a full workday session of just back-to-back prompts, you could probably be spending somewhere between $10 and $15 on this thing. You know what I mean? So, I mean, that's just at least in my case. So that's not bad. I suggest also like a 3 flash as a fallback, especially if you're kind of like on a budget with this thing. And if you're using, say, Heartbeats or something like that, definitely downgrade to like a cheaper model. I would say like 4.0 mini, or maybe like a 1.5 flash or like 2.0 flash, something like that, where it doesn't really cost much because these things you literally just run in the background, whether it's every 30 minutes or whether it's every 45 minutes, an hour, whatever it is. Mine runs at 30 minutes. So this probably cost me maybe $1 or $2 a day, just the Heartbeats itself, you know what I mean? So things like that. And let's see. So you want to make your agents also intelligent and let them evolve with you. So I kind of mentioned that like philosophy, that meta mindset before, but you want to give this thing tools, whether it's to MCP servers, whether it's to something like OpenRouter where you can quickly filter in and out and test different kinds of models to see what works for your flow, because there's many different flows, many different use cases people are using it for. I'm currently trying to do something around in e-commerce. So Kimi K25 or 2.5 works for me at least, but in other flows maybe you don't even need these like bigger agentic models where there's all these different kinds of steps and things like that. You want to also have like fallback chains so you're not hitting, say, rate limits or something just like screws up and it just stops right there. You know what I mean? Because I noticed that when something screws up, or if you're using a weaker model, what happens is it just acts dumb at every prompt after that. If you have the whole entire workflow already set up to be like, okay, go from this phase to this phase to this phase to this phase, and then somehow like a compaction happens in the meantime where you hit like a daily rate limit or something like that, it's just gonna act stupid every prompt after that if you're using a pretty stupid model. You know what I mean? So have fallbacks just in case something happens. And if you are getting hit with like rate limits, I've experienced a lot of rate limits with Gemini 3 Flash. Either upgrade to a tier that can accept higher rate limits, or find another provider, honestly, because it's just gonna like really mess up your flow. Another thing I want to mention here is Composio. So it's basically like this tool where you can enable your agents to have access to all these different kinds of tools, from setting up ads, from accessing, say, I don't know, various different platforms. Maybe it can access different kinds of APIs, whatever like that. So I think it's also like a really useful tool that you can set up and hook up your agent to. You know what I mean? So and then also you would probably have to add it into its skills that it has access to this thing and it can pretty much do it. Now I think memory architecture is something pretty important here, because in one of the slides before, I think this one right here, you saw kind of how like there's these memory graphs and stuff like that, which just kind of inspired from Obsidian, and I think it's pretty cool. But I think there's something there when it comes to the memory and how it's already creating my whole entire database. And I think it gives it a really good way how to navigate it. So the thing is, okay, so if something is stupid here, don't mind it, because I kind of like vibe coded this whole entire thing too based off my notes. So maybe something it may not sound right, but what I'm trying to say here on this slide is that you want to have a sort of foundation as to how the memory is being built out. You know what I mean? So the way you want your memory to be built out is you want to have a strong foundation from the very beginning. I actually made a video a few days ago on how to set up a architecture, or like what the philosophy behind it is. But you basically want it to consistently and frequently produce wiki links and have these sorts of portals of how it can navigate between different files. So whether it can go above itself, it can go down itself, it can go to side by side related files. So you're basically hooking it up and giving it this sort of like graph links, kind of as you saw here. So over time, like you don't have to prompt the bot right away to be like, yo, set up these memory graphs, set up these links right off the bat. That's going to take up a lot of tokens. It's probably going to cost you some compactions and stuff like that. It's probably going to like just become dumber over time and not be able to complete everything in one go. So the best way to do it is to have the foundation set up as soon as possible and then let it grow with you. So you would probably want to prompt and modify the agents.md file, also the memory file where it has the structure and knows what to do. And then there's probably going to be some files sort of in your code base where you have, say, like how does it work? You know what I mean? How it can navigate between different files. So I made a video on that before, so you just check it out if you don't know what it is. But you're going to want the bot to frequently link things together, to know how to navigate between files, to have sorts of maps of content where there's like these maps of like, okay, like if you've ever been to a mall, it shows you how to actually get to certain stores, right? So it's the same thing here. And then you want to have maps of content of specific categories. So if you have something very specific you're working on, say if it's something within automations and there's like a lot of stuff going on there, you want it to give maps of content and links to different reference points where you can go. So you're basically just trying to set up the foundation. So the way this thing's linking and creating files is literally like your brain, because when you think of something, you don't just remember everything, right? It's very like connected in terms of what you think about. So if I think of apples, I think of trees. If I think of trees, I think of all kinds of trees. So it's just like very connected in terms of how your mind works. So you want to set the same foundation here into your OpenClaw. So let's see the memory. So basically in my OpenClaw, I have this primary map file where there's map of like all the meta main pieces of content. And here, this is one of the very first files it reads, and you can basically prompt the agents.md or whatever to read this file at the time. So it has like a navigation, how to use it. And then basically how the system works, right? So I created like the system file where it's also injected into the bot. And if you don't know how to do this, just literally prompt the AI and it'll be able to self-inject itself with it. And from there, it gives it the rules, the architecture, how to operate through all these things. So make sure your owner.md file also, or just like the user file, is pretty much the same thing, is configured. So you know exactly, or the bot knows exactly about you, your business, what you're doing, how you're trying to use this thing. So it also has that context. I mentioned a bit about the soul maps of content. That's like another thing that's kind of related to the maps, but it's just like mini maps of this bigger map. You know what I mean? So that's kind of like the idea here. I already touched some of these things. Now, some other little tips I found that are very useful because some of these workflows are very, very long and very intensive. And if they're very long, such as like 40,000 characters plus, it can really eat up into the tokens and also the memory of a chat session. So I found some hacks how you can pretty much make it a bit more smaller, and that's not having all the instructions and flows and sequences of like if cases within it. So instead you can have this concept called decision trees, where say there's like a line of, hey, if you run into this situation, go to this file. If you run into this situation, go to this file. If you run into this situation, you go into that file. And then there's like a bunch of instructions there how to proceed with that situation. So sometimes things are very nuanced, and you can't I mean, you can fit everything in a file, but it's just going to be ridiculously long for no reason. And sometimes, quite honestly, the bot doesn't even need to read everything. So that's why you can have these folders called decision trees with many instructions within all of them. And let's see. So yeah, that's kind of like how I separate it here, where the logic, you can also do another type of layout for how you're creating some of these files, or like skill files, where say in the skills, the way you classify and create everything is mostly just the logic, the brains of like how this works. And then if it needs to go execute something, such as like if this happens then that, then go execute here, you know what I mean? So that's kind of like what I'm writing here. Another thing I found pretty useful is once I started getting more deeper into the sub agents and creating more agents, I think something that's been really useful is having a sub agent template. So every time you spawn or create an agent, it has like a working markdown file format that say, okay, like this is what the memory looks like, this is what the identity looks like, this is blah 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 that has to go here, you know what I mean? Like these are the configurations, so you can just rinse, wash, and repeat across all kinds of agents. And I think it's pretty important just to have like a template file for it, and then also a skill how to use the template. So that's been pretty useful in terms of being a time saver. Writing your own skills, I think it's pretty good to at least reference and see how skills are created and modified online. But personally, I don't feel comfortable downloading skills because of just some of the malware and things going on online. So that's just been like a personal security precaution I've been taking, and just writing my own skills or just researching what I need and then just adding it there. Now, so I kind of mentioned this before I hinted it, but how I pretty much work with it is mostly just vibe coding and just speaking to my computer, letting it do its thing. Sometimes I'll have the bot on the left side of the screen. Sometimes on the other side of the screen, I'll have say like OpenClaw, or I'm sorry, I'll have like Claude, probably using just like Opus or say Sonnet. And then I'm just prompting it and just trying to use a more intelligent model, how to research, troubleshoot something, and then solve it from there, right? Because if I'm using, say, Kimmy, it's probably not the best in terms of like its intelligence and what it can do, right? But I found whenever I use like Opus or Sonnet, it always solves my problem. So that's been like one thing I found pretty useful. And another thing that I think is pretty useful is having sort of like a master command sheet, where basically in this, like I just keep it in my notes app on my computer, and it's just basically a cheat sheet of, okay, if I want to open the browser UI to see what's going on in the OpenClaw UI browser, here's the command how to access it, you know what I mean? Here's things I have to put into it in order to access it, or here's how I can restart the gateway, or here's how I can, I don't know, modify something in the config, you know what I mean? So these little tips in like the notes file app or in the notes app, that's at least helped me just be better with it. So what I store in it, anything from prompts, commands, how to work with the gateway, how to use the browser UI, and honestly anything that just saves your time. So yeah, I guess this is pretty much it from the video. The main takeaways really is, I think probably the number one thing, or yeah, is the memory architecture. Being able to have a memory architecture right off the bat, because even if when I'm working with my own personal Obsidian, I created a architecture and a structure and a system that I haven't changed in 4 or 5 years. There's all these things happening online, but what works for me has been working for the 4 or 5 years. So I believe having a proper foundation and just let it grow organically is going to serve you a lot, and honestly save you a lot of time the more you use it. So having a proper foundation right off the bat, and if you don't know if this is right for you, if you don't like it, then honestly just find something else that works for you. You know what I mean? I've just found this useful for myself from my Obsidian, and now I'm just gonna apply it here into the OpenClaw. And the other thing I feel is pretty useful is being able to actually access the files through the Obsidian. I think that's been something very useful for me, and not using it on this clunky FileZilla app, you know what I mean? So I'd rather use it on my Obsidian, and then from there I can easily just modify it and see what the heck is going on. And that's about it, you know what I mean? So I think these are some of the biggest takeaways I got from using this thing for over 100 hours. And I hope you guys found this pretty useful yourself.